What is the rationale behind the use of myth by writers? For those who use myths to create fiction, Mr. Tripathi, is it because a myth can provide a convenient peg from which to hang a story? For poets, Mr. Mahapatra, who weave myths into their poetry, is it merely cultural embroidery, or is there a deeper reason? Is the writer trying to convey some hidden message using myth as allegory? Or is it an instinctive reaching out for one's own roots, a process of self-discovery? 4. Do writers feel the need to recreate and modernize familiar myths, or do they prefer to leave myths as they are? And lastly, do myths work in modern times? Do they still have an effect on us, seeing that most of us are cut off from our roots?
Why are myths still relevant in India as compared to many other cultures? As compared to, say, the myths of Greece, where the myths of Zeus and the Olympian gods, which are extremely rich, profound, and philosophical myths, why have they died out in Greece? Why don't the Greeks worship Zeus anymore? But in India, myths that are thousands of years old remain alive. And if you ask most Indians, including me, is Lord Shiva real? And of course, we'll say, yes, he's very real. He's not mythical. He lives in our hearts. Why is it that myths in India tend to remain alive, whereas myths in many other cultures, like in Greece or in Egypt or in ancient Mesopotamia, why have they died out? I heard an interesting explanation of the word mythos in Greece, where a Greek person told me is mythos is that which hides the truth. And a mythology, a mythological story is supposed to be a challenge. You're supposed to go through that story and discover the truth that lies within. Now, if you take this interpretation of mythos, then you realize that the myth itself is actually not that important. What is important is the truth that lies within. And I feel this is something that we Indians have really got for thousands of years. Going back to Greece, why did Zeus die out in the early in the early part of the first millennium? When the Greek attitudes were changing, the Greek gods, their myths did not update to reflect the new culture of the Greeks. So what happened was that for many of the Greeks, the Greek gods became less relevant. They stopped seeing their gods as free-spirited and passionate. They started seeing them as debauched and decadent. And obviously, if they stopped respecting their gods, then the myths of those gods died out. That's what happened in Greece. That's what happened in Egypt. That's what happened in many countries. Why didn't it happen in India? Because we Indians have a genius for reinventing and localizing our myths again and again and again. If you read, I mean, there's of course a version of the Ramayana that's popular in Orissa. But if you go to North India, the version of the Ramayana that's most popular is the Ramcharitmanas, written by Sant Tulsidas Ji in the 16th century. Which actually, if you read that and you read the Valmiki Ramayana, you will find quite a few changes, quite a few differences. The entire Uttarkand is missing, for example, in the Ramcharitmanas. The character of Sita Ji is quite different. In the Valmiki Ramayana, she's a much stronger character. In the Ramcharitmanas, she's much more, for the want of a better word, docile. What did Tulsidas Ji do? He modernized the Ramayana to the North Indian milieu of the 16th century. And he made it relevant for those people. If you go to Tamil Nadu, there's a different version of the Ramayana called the Kamba Ramayana, in which Ravan is not a pure evil demon. He's shown as a good king who made mistakes. He's shown as an intellectual. He's shown as a very devoted Shiva worshipper. The Tandav Stotra, which is inspiring to any Shiva worshipper, was actually composed by Ravan. And that's a version of the Ramayana that's popular in Tamil Nadu. If you go to Southeast Asia, they have their own version of the Ramayana, some of which actually don't show Hanumanji as a bachelor. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that Indians have had this ability to modernize and localize our myths again and again, which makes our myths relevant to the modern era. In a sense, I don't think I've done anything new. I'm only following a rich ancient tradition in India of reinventing myths, of looking at myths again. So therefore, in my books, essentially what I've done is I've based my books on a premise that what if we believe that Lord Shiva was a real historical man and his karma was so grand that people started thinking of him as a god. And if you believe this premise, then what's the story of a man called Shiva? In that sense, I don't think I've done anything new at all, actually. I think I've been Indian, actually. The purpose of myths is to convey some message for today's world. And it's not an end in itself. And it can, of course, be seen as a beautiful story. But I think most of them also had messages which we are supposed to decode. And maybe some of those myths had messages for the world of that era. And we need to have new myths to give messages for today's world. And it's only in English language publishing that myths had kind of gone out of fashion. If you see in Indian languages, in Marathi, for example, there was this wonderful book called Mrityunjay, which approached Mahabharata from Karna's perspective. And I thought it gave some messages for today's world as well. So there are many myths like this, which in Indian languages, where we try and relook at those myths and give messages for today's world. And I think it's a wonderful medium to achieve that.
I think it's time that we went to the other speaker, Mr. Dr. Sitakant Mahapatra, and because he's another writer who has used myths in a very creative way. So let's listen to what he has to say about the use of mythology.
There was a time in human history when man tried to find answer to different phenomena, natural phenomena, and could not succeed. And therefore, he discovered a way of explaining why the sun is being eclipsed, why the moon sets in a particular time of the night, and so on. I am speaking of the primitive, illiterate and tribal society of ancient times. Coming to our times, we have to realize that myth is a phenomenon which will always be with us. And today, it can be used not merely in literature, but as a political phenomenon. For example, there are political myths. Myths can be created in political terms, not to explain, but to cheat. That is why the different uses of myths have gone very much away from what it was originally meant to be or used to be. In the beginning of literature, there was myth, and it is also at the end of it.
In a myth, what matters is the truth that is hidden behind the story. See? And he also said that we Indians have a knack for reinventing myths to keep them relevant, and that is why myths have survived in India and they have not survived in Greece or Egypt, so where a different culture grew up. Dr. Mahapatra also went back to the origin of myths. He said that myths arise from primitive man's inability to answer questions which science tries to answer today. See, why does the sun rise? Why do we have eclipses? And so on. And because primitive man was not able to find an answer to these questions, he therefore created his own myths. In other words, if I understand him right, a myth is an admission of intellectual defeat or intellectual inadequacy. That the intellect cannot provide answers to everything, so we turn to other emotional truths. You see,
I didn't think that my book would be successful amongst the youth. Actually, I didn't think my book would get published either. So, but when it was finally published, I didn't think the youth would pick it up. But from the emails that I get, a large majority of my readers are the youth. But of course, their reaction to the book, their reaction to our myths are very different from what you would expect from an older generation. So, for example, there was this 14-year-old kid who written into me saying that he used to think Lord Shiva was his grandmother's god, but now he thinks that Lord Shiva is the dude of the gods. So and that's the way the youth think. So they think of him as a cool god. In fact, he is a very democratic god. He doesn't talk down to his devotees. He treats his wife as an equal. Parvati ji always sits next to him, shoulder to shoulder, as an equal. She doesn't sit below him. There are many times when Parvati ji does what she thinks is right, and Lord Shiva doesn't, punish her for disobeying him. He continues to obsessively love her. He dances brilliantly. He's a fierce warrior. He drinks bhang. He's, in a sense, even in his mythical forms, he's a very cool god. So I can understand the youth being attracted to someone like him. There are many messages in my book. Stand against the caste system, stand for women's empowerment. But the central message is an answer to a question: what is evil? That philosophical thought was the genesis of the Shiva trilogy. It occurred to me around 8 years ago, and what I'm trying to do to my 3 books is build the case for that philosophy of what is evil, because I think it has relevance to today's world as well, and I hope at least some readers agree with me on that.